Hi, this is Elise Touche, Purpose and Leadership Coach with Shine a Light Coaching, and this video is about a decision-making and problem-solving model based on the Myers-Briggs Type indicator. But first, a refresher. What you've learned so far about yourself and your type is that there are different ways and places that we get our energy from and where we direct our attention, and that is the extroversion and introversion dichotomy represented by E and I. E for extroversion, it means that you direct your attention and you get your energy from the outer world of people, experiences, action, activity, etc. If you have a preference for introversion, represented by the letter I, and these are the 8 I types, your energy comes from going within. It comes from reflecting on your thoughts and your memories and your feelings, and that's also where you direct your attention. We also look at how you take in information, and that's the sensing and intuition dichotomy. So S for sensing, these are the 8 sensing types. And when it comes to sensing, that means you take in information that's real and actual, it's what's actually happening. They're really observant about the specifics of what's going on around you. If your preference is for intuition, which is represented with the letter N, and here are the 8 intuition types, it's more about the big picture and focusing on relationships and connections between facts rather than the facts themselves, and really, moving quickly from your gut to conclusions and following hunches. And then we look at how you like to make decisions, and that's the thinking and feeling dichotomy. T represents thinking. Here are the 8 thinking types. T represents thinking, and folks, if you have a preference for thinking, then you're more logical, analytical, and critical. Whereas if you have a preference for feeling, represented with the letter F, these are the 8 feeling types, then your preference is really more for creating harmony, being guided by your values, and really honoring people and what their values are. And then finally, we look at how you structure yourself in the outer world. And so this is the J and P dichotomy, J for judging, P for perceiving. With J, here are the 8 judging preferences. It's about really liking to be scheduled, systematic, have some structure, and drive towards conclusions. Whereas with the preference for perceiving, represented by the letter P, here are the 8 perceiving types, it's more about being spontaneous, flexible, casual. So hopefully that jogged your memory a little bit on what your preferences are. Now, we're going to take a look at when you combine all of it, what does that look like? So we're going to use in this video the ENFJ type as an example. So after you discovered what your best fit type was, then we looked at a detailed description, and this is just an excerpt, but a detailed description of your type. And one of the things that you learned is that those middle 2 letters, the N and F, those are functions. So the other functions are sensing and thinking. So again, if we think about how you take in information, sensing and intuition, and how you make decisions, thinking and feeling, those are the 4 functions in the Myers-Briggs concept. And even though for the ENFJ, the N and the F are represented in their preferences, they actually use all of the functions. It's just a matter of how they use those functions. So what you learned was that the dominant function, in this case feeling for the ENFJ, the dominant function is the driver of the personality. It decides where you're going, how to turn, how fast to go, when to slow down. It's really making up the largest part of your personality. The passenger, in this case, the intuition for the ENFJ is the auxiliary function. They are like the passenger or the navigation system. They're actively involved in this driving process, but they aren't necessarily leading the way to where you're going. They're doing a lot of informing and actively engaged. Now, the tertiary function, sensing for the ENFJ, is like the teenager in the back seat with earbuds in. You really have to ask for their involvement. They're not really going to be engaged. They're just kind of checked out, texting, doing whatever on their phone. And so you really need to engage that function when you need it. And it's not going to be as well developed as your other functions. And then the 4th or inferior function is thinking for the ENFJ. And it's like the baby in the car seat. It is the least developed function for the ENFJ, or the 4th or inferior function for all types is the least developed. In this case, thinking for the ENFJ. And so it can come out when we're at our worst, and it's not that reliable for us. So it's often helpful to know people that can help us with this function. So to look at it in a slightly different way, the ENFJ in this example, the order in which they use their functions starts with feeling, their dominant function, moves on to intuition, their auxiliary function, then sensing, which is their third or tertiary function, and then thinking, which is fourth or inferior function. But what does this have to do with problem solving and decision making? Well, we're going to leave our ENFJ for a second and look at a more of a model instead, a general model. So here's a useful way to consider solving problems and making decisions. So there's always some place that you need to start, right? And so you can start with sensing by defining the problem and looking at the facts at hand. Then you move on to intuition, which is where you consider all the possibilities based on the problem that you already defined. You look at the larger picture, long-term implications, etc. Then you start to weigh the consequences of all those possibilities and start to apply logic to it, some pros and cons and cause and effect of the possibilities you came up with based on the problem that you defined. And then finally, you weigh the alternatives by considering people and values. So based on all of these possibilities and after you've logicked it out, now you need to consider how will this actually work for people, and do we need to make some accommodations or have some alternatives in place? And that's the feeling function. And this is, of course, based on the possibilities that you already applied logic to based on the problem that you already defined. And if you do all of that, you're usually arriving at a solution that's pretty well-rounded and is probably going to be pretty useful. So the problem is nobody actually does it this way. Let's go ahead and go back to our ENFJ as an example to show you how an ENFJ solves problems. Where they start is they want to weigh the alternatives and consider people and values first. So when a circumstance comes up, they're jumping straight to how do we honor people and values. Then they start considering all the possibilities in which they can do that and look at the bigger picture. Then they look at the facts. And they're looking at the facts at this point not necessarily to define the problem anymore. They're just looking at the facts based on the possibilities they've come up with. And then they start to apply logic to see, the cause and the effect, the pros and the cons, and to be more objective about it. The difference being that when we were arriving at a solution with the other model, it was after we went through the entire process. With individuals, what typically is happening is they are arriving at a solution or a decision once they've gone through the first two functions. And then they use these bottom two functions to gather support and evidence to support their decision that they've made. Well, let's look at these side by side now. First, with the model that we discussed, it's a square for a reason. It's really representing a process from start to finish, top to bottom. But then the fact that there's kind of this equal ability and inclination that's happening at all levels, equal time and importance applied to all of these levels. As you can see, that doesn't work with the individual model. That doesn't work with how individuals actually operate. It's obviously very different. And it's more than just that there's a square or a triangle. It's that as the individual is working through this process, their ability and inclination and their preference for doing these things starts to diminish. So not only are they trying to justify a solution or a decision they've come to really naturally through their natural preferences, but they might be doing it using sensing, in this case the ENFJ, using sensing and thinking in a way in a way that isn't as strong as their other preferences. So what should our ENFJ do? The best thing that they can do is say, who do I know? If I were to fill in names right here, who do I know that can help me round out this decision-making process better, right? Who do I know that is really good with the pros and cons and cause of the effect, that can be really kind of black and white and logical about something to help me with the thinking portion? And who do I know that's really good at helping to define the problem, who's always saying, yeah, but what are we trying to do here? They're really helping you define the problem and to look at the facts so that you can make sure that you're solving the right problem. And then with the intuition in this example, that might not be they might not need as much support with this, but it can always be helpful to get more support if necessary. Now, based on your type, if you were to look at the Introduction to Type booklet that you received, on the description on your page, it tells you what your dominant function, auxiliary function, tertiary function, and fourth function are. That's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is the order in which you do things: 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what you want to do is make sure you start to identify the people who can help you make your triangle look at least a little bit more like a square. It won't ever get there completely, but at least you can be more aware of it so that then you can come up with better, more well-rounded solutions and decisions. I hope you found this information useful, but if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to contact me. My email address is elise@salcoaching.com.